Hi there and welcome to this GCSE virtual revision guide for Unit 9 Biology, and today we'll be looking at hormones. So what we need to know today is that hormones link to homeostasis from the past modules. So remind you, homeostasis is the maintenance of a constant internal environment. And it's vital for your enzymes to make sure they're at the optimum conditions and your cells, and it relies on a mixture of nerves, hormones and organs to control the body, and we're going to focus on the hormone side of things today. The main conditions are controlling homeostasis are water content, which we'll be looking at today, body temperature, which we won't be looking at, and blood glucose concentration. So hormones then are basically mostly made out of proteins, okay, and they are chemical messengers that are always made in something called endocrine glands. So you see on the page now, we've got the endocrine system, which is all the glands that release a hormone, and they're always travelled in through the blood. And they always work on what we call a target organ, so a specific organ. So you may get a question saying something like, why is insulin a hormone? And the answer would be, it's a chemical messenger. It's made in an endocrine gland, i.e. The pancreas, and it works on a target, it moves through the blood, and it works on a target organ of the liver, let's say. And there are two hormones that you need to know about, which often people forget to revise. One of them from the thyroid gland is the hormone thyroxine, and it's involved in controlling your metabolism, so your metabolic rate, the rate of chemical reactions in your cells, and also in your growth. And the other example is adrenaline, and adrenaline is released by the adrenal glands, and one of the main organs it has effect on is your heart, but it's involved in what we call the flight or fight response, or fight or flight, or flight or fight, which way around to say it, which is basically protecting you from danger. So it can increase your heart rate, increasing the blood flow around your body. It can allow your pupils to dilate, which in wild animals makes them look more scary. It can reduce the pain you feel. It can move your blood flow from, say, your intestines towards your muscles. So your muscles have got as much oxygen as glucose as possible to respire and release energy. And it makes the hairs on your arms and body stand erect to try and make you look again as an animal more scary. Now, hormones work generally through a process called negative feedback. And this is a process bringing around a reversal of any change in your body. So temperature is a useful one to talk about. If your body temperature goes too high, the body detects the temperature change, and therefore this will be detected and responses will happen to reverse that change, to lower the temperature change. If your body then gets too cold, reversals will happen to try and increase that temperature change. So that is negative feedback. It is worth saying though that adrenaline uses something called positive feedback, and positive feedback is when your body continues to enhance that change. So adrenaline, your heart rate might have gone up and your heart rate continues to go up, the more adrenaline added to it, which often is a bad thing actually in the body. Now, one area you need to know in quite a lot of detail is the control of blood glucose levels. And blood glucose levels are essential to control, because if they're not controlled, it can cause uncontrolled osmosis in and out of cells, and it can cause symptoms such as organ failure, blindness, and even death if people with diabetes don't control their blood glucose levels, or concentrations, I should say. So basically this graph sort of shows it here, but your blood glucose levels obviously naturally for a day go up and down. So at times, let's say an hour or so after you've eaten, your blood glucose levels might be too high. So if they're too high, the pancreas detects the high concentration of blood glucose. So this is really critical, because often people are asked that one mark question in an exam and they say the brain. The brain doesn't involve at all in blood glucose concentration detection. The pancreas then responds by releasing insulin, which is a hormone that travels via the blood to the target organ of the liver. It also affects the muscles as well, which you can get a mark for at GCSE. And it lowers then the response. The negative feedback is to lower that increase in blood glucose concentration and lower that blood glucose concentration. And it does so by making sure the liver can absorb more glucose, so it's taking it out of the blood into the liver. In the liver itself or in the muscle cells, it will increase the rate of respiration, which uses glucose up to release energy. And this might be sometimes where you feel hot. If you've eaten lots of sugar, you might feel hot about half an hour later because your body burns that energy off. And it can convert glucose, which is soluble and therefore does affect osmosis, into glycogen, which is insoluble and therefore doesn't affect osmosis. So glycogen is like the storage version of sugar in humans or animals, whereas plants use starch, humans and animals use glycogen. So the point of this is that glycogen is insoluble, so it doesn't cause osmosis to happen, whereas glucose does allow osmosis to happen, and that can damage your cells. Now, later on in the day, let's say an hour or so before lunch, you might start running out of glucose and your blood glucose level concentrations may drop. And if your blood glucose concentrations drop, again, it is the pancreas that detects the blood glucose concentration has dropped. But this time, it inhibits, and I haven't wrote that down, unfortunately, it stops the release of insulin and it releases a hormone called glucagon. So think of it as glucose has gone. And this travels again via the bloodstream to the target organ of the liver and also the muscles, where we can say the following effects are happening. So if the blood glucose concentration is too low, negative feedback occurs, reversing that change, and it raises the blood glucose levels by basically doing the opposite of the three things that the ticks above. So being more, it stops glucose being absorbed into the liver. It decreases the rate of respiration, and it converts glycogen back into glucose, and more can be released into the bloodstream. And that is how a healthy person would control their blood glucose levels. However, not everyone is able to do that because of diabetes. And diabetes, there are two main types, although scientists believe there might be over 200 types of diabetes, but two that we need to know about. First one, type 1 diabetes, which is normally an inherited condition and people get in the first few years of their life. Type 1 diabetes, you can see the symptoms there, which you don't actually need to know but are useful in case for your own health reasons. You need to know that this happens because the pancreas stops producing insulin or doesn't produce enough insulin, and therefore it doesn't go to the liver and the liver doesn't do the things we just spoke about. The treatment for type 1 diabetes is insulin injections. If you're not producing it, it makes sense to inject it into yourself. And they are looking at things like insulin inhalers these days now to try and stop you having to use injections. Also, you would have to control your diet and monitor your carbohydrate intakes. We're looking at, there are some cures, some of them not that successful, and there are some potential increased chances of cures in the future. So you can get a pancreas transplant, but this is a difficult operation, and also you only have one pancreas, so it can only be people who have left it after they've died. Transplant working pancreatic cells, so maybe take some from someone else's pancreas that is working and put them into yours and see if that helps. And stem cell research has hopefully allowed us the idea that we could use your own stem cells, adult stem cells from, say, your skin, maybe put them into the pancreas, and hopefully it will start them to function again. Obviously, if you're using your own stem cells, you wouldn't have the problems of rejection, which we'll talk about later when we talk about kidneys and explain that a bit more. Type 2 diabetes, though, is the one that is on a massive increase in the developed world, and it is because the main risk factor, which is the main thing that can increase your chances of getting that disease, is obesity. And type 2 diabetes, if you look at that, very, very similar symptoms there, apart from the extra things of particularly the tingling in the fingers. But type 2 diabetes is when your body cells, so the muscle cells or the liver cells, don't respond to insulin. So then you're producing insulin, but they don't respond to it. And that one you can't inject insulin to, so you have to develop by increased exercise to use up that glucose in your body, and regulating your diet of carbohydrates, make sure you don't have too many carbohydrates. So the second area which you need to look at is the kidney, and the kidney is a vital organ in your body, and its job is to control the water volume, because too much water volume will increase your blood pressure, too little will drop it. Mineral and ion concentrations, so salts basically in your bodies, and also it is the job of the kidney to filter the blood to remove a toxic waste product that we use from the breakdown of proteins called urea, and that actually gets turned into urine in the kidneys. And that process is what we call excretion, the removal of waste products from your body. And the two forms of excretion we do is urinate and breathing it out. And your kidneys basically are fed by the oxygenated blood in the renal artery. Okay, so that goes into the kidneys, and that has not been filtered at that point, but it's full of oxygenated, unfiltered blood. And then it leaves via the renal vein. So that would be deoxygenated blood because it's gone past it through the organ, but it has also been filtered. So the blood is constantly going past the kidneys and filtering as it does so. So there's basically 3 stages of how the kidneys work. And the kidneys work through loads and loads of tiny little tubes called nephrons. And effectively you need to understand that there's millions of these tubes all doing the same thing, and cleaning the blood of each person. So the nephrons work by doing the following things. First of all, waste is filtered from the blood, something called ultrafiltration. And basically the smaller molecules can fit through holes in the start of the kidney, and that means small molecules get through. So this means things like blood cells can't get through, things like hormones, big proteins can't get through, but water gets through, urea gets through, which is what we're trying to get rid of, glucose gets through, and salts get through. Now, some of those things we want to get rid of, some of them we want to get rid of some of them, and some of them we want to completely not get rid of, we want to stop them leaving our body. So we do something called selective reabsorption, and 100%, all of it, 100% of the glucose is selectively reabsorbed. You should not lose any glucose in your urine. Also, salts, so dissolved ions, some of them might be reabsorbed because we do need salt. Okay, so only excess stuff needs to be passed out. So some does leave via our urine, but we reabsorb some. And water, depending on what day it is, whether it's a hot day, whether you drank a lot, whether you drank little, different amounts of water will be reabsorbed back into your bloodstream. And then at the end of the kidney, urine is then released, and urine is a mixture of urea, water, and ions. And notice we don't reabsorb any urea. That is the thing we're trying to get rid of. And the urine goes down to your bladder to be stored, to be released when you go to the toilet. So there is a hormone linked to this called ADH, or antidiuretic hormone, and it is made in the pituitary gland. So remember that gland at the top of the endocrine glands. The pituitary gland is the gland that controls all the other glands in your endocrine system. And water levels in the blood are basically detected constantly as it flows through something called the hypothalamus of your brain. And basically what happens, it can be one of two things. Your water levels could be too low. So let's say it's a really hot day and you've been sweating and you haven't had enough to drink. Your urine would go, you produce less urine and it'd be more dark and more concentrated because it'd have less water in it. And this is because of this ADH hormone. So what happens is the hypothalamus detects that you've got low water levels because you haven't drank enough or you've been sweating or both. The pituitary then will produce more ADH, release that into the bloodstream where it goes to the target organ of the kidney tubules, and it makes them more permeable to water. So what that means is they reabsorb more water back into the bloodstream and less water is lost. So if you look at this diagram, you can see here that we've got the nephron, and we've got the water that's been reabsorbed, absorbed from the bloodstream. The water travels around these long tubes. If it kept going down, it would be lost via the bladder, but it gets reabsorbed here back into the bloodstream more and more because it's made permeable to allow it to do so. So it doesn't go back into the bladder. So small amounts only leave the bladder. Now, on a different day where water levels are too high, let's say you've drank loads and it's not particularly hot, what will happen is the hypothalamus detects those high levels. The pituitary gland therefore goes, no, we don't need this ADH hormone, so it releases less of it. It goes to the kidney tubule, or less of it goes to the kidney tubule. It makes them less permeable to water, so less is reabsorbed, and therefore more water goes down into the bladder. And you produce more urine, because instead of going through, it goes through, like we said before, but this time there's no reabsorption in this collecting duct, which you don't need to know that name for GCSE, and all the water that gets through goes straight out by the urine, so you produce more pale, high volumes of urine. So unfortunately for some people, kidneys will fail in our lifetime, and whilst we have 2 of those and one of them will work fine, sometimes both of your kidneys may fail. This could be caused due to infections. It could be due to like an impact. You had a car crash and they got impacted. It could be due to cancers. It could be due to the taking of drugs. And if that happens, there are 2 ways in which people can be sort of kept healthy as much as possible and treated. And that first method is using kidney dialysis. Now, kidney dialysis is an artificial method of controlling and filtering your blood. And basically it takes the blood out of your body via a vein, via an artery. That blood goes through a machine where it is effectively filtered, and then it goes back into your body, and it has to go through and out your body several times in order to allow this to work. Now, dialysis fluid is the main method that this happens. So when the blood leaves your body, it goes through a machine and it goes the opposite direction through a machine to the dialysis fluid, which is on the opposite side of a membrane. And as a result, diffusion will happen to move things out of your blood that we don't want. Now, the dialysis fluid then has to have the exact correct concentrations of materials in there, otherwise you'd have unwanted diffusion happening out of your blood. So the dialysis fluid has high levels of glucose in the dialysis fluid, and that prevents glucose leaving your blood because it's got a higher concentration in the dialysis fluid, so there's no net movement from a higher to lower concentration out of your blood. Urea, there'll be no urea in the dialysis fluid because we want all of that urea to leave the blood and move into dialysis fluid. So there should always be a concentration gradient. So there should be a higher concentration of urea in the blood than there is in the dialysis fluid. Now, dialysis is obviously really good because it keeps people alive, and often it's the answer whilst people are waiting for a kidney transplant, which we're about to talk about. But dialysis isn't perfect, and there are problems with dialysis, and these include the fact that you can't really control your salt levels very well, so you have to control them very closely in the diet. Urea is made due to the breakdown of proteins in your liver, so people who are on dialysis have to really try and maintain a low protein diet, which can have other health impacts as well. This is some process you need to do about maybe 3 times a week for up to 12 hours, depending on the level of your kidney problems. And if you are doing this, a lot of people will have to do this in hospitals because they don't have the money to have the equipment at home. And also it is difficult to maintain over time. It gets more tricky. And one that isn't on there is an expensive process that's costly for the NHS as well. So ideally what you'd be able to do is get a kidney transplant. And it's when a donor gives you a working kidney, and that is a permanent solution to the problem. However, there are issues with kidney transplants. So there is a rejection issue, and this is because, if you remember, cells are covered in markers called antigens that your immune system checks up on to make sure there aren't any pathogens in your body, any disease causing cells in your body. And because everyone has slightly different antigens, your immune system may detect it and think that the replacement kidney, the donor kidney, is actually something trying to attack your body. So the immune system then might do what we call autoimmune disease, where it attacks those kidneys and it causes rejection. And this is why we try and have exact tissue matches, i.e. normally close family members, because the closer you are related, the less likely that your antigens are going to be different from the other person's. And we also have other disadvantages then as a result. So because your white blood cells may attack, your immune system may attack the kidney, people who are on who have had kidney transplants have to take immunosuppressant drugs for their entire life, and that is obviously expensive, but it also lowers your immune system's capability to fight infections. So people who often have kidney transplants are more susceptible to other infections due to those drugs. And there's obviously an issue of a waiting list. There is a lack of donors. Something like 40% of patients still die on the waiting list for a kidney transplant.